Hello, beautiful people. You are listening to the Communal Table Podcast, part of Food and Wine Pro. I'm your host, Kat Kinsman, and my guest today is one of my favorite human beings in the entire galaxy, New York Times restaurant critic, Mr. Pete Wells.
Hello, Kat.
Hello, Pete Wells. Would you indulge me for a moment?
Yes.
And go on a journey?
Yes.
This journey begins on a night 20 years ago.
Yes.
1998, December 31st, 1998.
I remember it well. The moon was in the east.
Juliet was in the west. I had recently started dating a fellow with a fine head of hair. This man, he still has a fine head of hair. And we'd been dating for a couple of weeks. And he said, we were playing this sort of casual, cool, like, oh, what are you doing for New Year's Eve? I don't know. What are you doing for New Year's Eve? Maybe do you want to meet up and go to a party? And I thought, yes, I would do this. It was 98 going into 99. We're all singing the Prince songs. And he said, well, I'm going to this party at the home of my friend Pete Wells. And I was like, oh, yeah, I think maybe I can show up. And it got stuck in my head, though. Pete Wells. Where had I heard that name before?
I think, does the audience know that at that point I was not globally famous yet?
Oh, this is all origin myth stuff. Yeah, no. Well, here's the thing: is
because there might be people who think I was just born famous.
You were sprung from the head of Zeus. I think, so far as most people are concerned. But I walked up the 5 flights, 6 flights. How many flights was this?
6.
I walked up 6 flights into the lair of this Mr. Pete Wells, and he was wearing a yellow shirt that I remember thinking that was browser safe because we thought of these things in 1998, and there was a giant vat of punch that was being served at the time. Do you remember the particular kind of punch it was?
I don't, but it might have been a fish house punch.
I couldn't remember. It was Schuylkill punch, fish house punch, something like that.
It might have been because I liked the fish house punch recipe a lot because it was so simple and dramatic, and it mostly involved opening like 3 or 4 different kinds of liquor and pouring them into the punch bowl and then walking away.
The punch bowl, which I seem to recall, was a stock pot.
Well,
that was
punch bowl. But punch bowl is in quotes, yeah.
It was kept out on the fire escape to remain chilly, and I thought that was a really great piece of hospitality innovation. But the name stuck in my head. I was thinking, Pete Wells. Why do I know this? At this point, I'm 26 years old. I know not much of the world. Had moved to New York City a couple years before, and then a couple weeks later, it dawned on me. We were all out. I was terrified of you the first time I met you. I'm just going to put that out there.
Well, rightly so.
You are a very terrifying person.
Yeah, I had my whip and my dagger and
all of these things plus more. And finally, I got up the courage to ask you, Pete Wells, is there some reason there would have been an entire issue of Sassy Magazine themed around you?
I cannot tell a lie.
Would you please explain to the listeners how and why there is an entire issue of Sassy Magazine with "For the Love of Pete Wells" on the spine for everybody in the masthead to say, like, Jane Pete Wells Pratt, etc. And the definition of a Pete Wells as a boy who you are way more into than you are into him.
Sort of. It was like we didn't have the word ghosting yet, but I guess I kind of ghosted somebody at Sassy, and she definitely got back at me in a pretty awesome way.
That had been in what year?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Early 90s, let's say.
Okay. So, but this all goes to say that you did not, in fact, spring fully formed. There was a Pete Wells before there was capital Pete Wells. So let us go back in time to your editorial journey, because everybody wants to know, how do you become you?
Yeah, right. I don't know. I mean, I really don't know. It definitely was not it was not planned at all in any way until maybe about 5 minutes before I started doing it.
'Cause when I met you in 1998, as I recall, you were working in some capacity at the New Yorker, and you were writing bar and country music reviews for Time Out.
Yeah, that was great. That was fun.
I wish I could pull out these Time Out reviews, because even the guy I was dating, hello Stephen Stern, how you doing today? Still a lovely friend. But he was in awe of you, as we all were, but you weren't in awe of you at the time, as I recall. But there were these little gems of reviews about bars, dive bars.
Yeah, mostly dive bars, because when I tried to do bars that thought they were nice, I just tore them to shreds. It was because it was before the what we call the cocktail revolution now. So the way that a cocktail bar is nice now is by having nice cocktails, but at the time they didn't really know how to do that, so they would just do ridiculous, pretentious things and have like 35 flavors of flavored vodka and our twist on the Cosmo and all these things that were just totally beside the point to me. All this decor, like sort of think of Sex and the City and what would have drawn them to a bar, and which was like just not my speed, I guess. So I would try to go to bars like that, and I would just rip them apart, and then I'd go to really any dive, and then at some point I discovered that what I really, really was responding to was if the emptier the bar was, the more I liked it. And then I thought about that, and I thought maybe there's a deeper issue here that should be explored outside of the realm of reviewing.
As they used to say on TV, the problem is in your set, the problem is not. But I feel like you had written about somewhere in my neighborhood that was one of those places where the regulars line up at 8 a.m, or...
Oh, on Fifth Avenue?
Yes.
Yeah, in those days, there were some really amazing bars along Fifth Avenue, and they've all kind of been...
O'Connor's.
Closed and hipsterized. O'Connor's was
the
most amazing. But Timbo's,
yes, right by the OTB.
Right. And then there was one called... Jackie's Fifth Amendment.
That was the one. Yes, you could buy.
They were all great, but they were just not. They weren't really like things that you could review. You just sort of had to go in and live the experience and then come back and tell the tale. But you couldn't like review it as if it were an aesthetic experience. The
thing is, these reviews are fundamental to me about who you are and who you have become as a critic, because the Pete that I met in 1990, probably for a couple minutes in 1998 going into 1999, there was a quintessential story about you that friends told you had been going through a breakup, and you spent it by going to the fish market. And I sort of got to know you as a scholar of old New York in that particular way. I picture you in this very up in the old hotel kind of way. This might have just been legend. There was legend.
Did I still have the crayfish when you met me?
You had a parrot.
I had the parrot, but not the crayfish. Yeah.
I don't think you. But yeah. So Pete, also for backstory for Pete. Pete for a very long time had a parrot, who was a lovely companion who I never actually got to meet.
Oh, Ignatz.
So if you can...
Ignatz was a good bird.
So you had him for how long?
I'm not really sure. I don't remember. A couple of years. He had belonged to somebody else in my building who needed to, I guess, deaccession his parrot and divest. And so I got him, and I had him for a couple of years, and then he died really, really suddenly, and I remember that. Pretty upset, and also surprised because he was supposed to have lived for 50 years or something, but he did not. But Ignatz talked a little bit. He said hello, and he said meow, and then he had this bark that was kind of like if you took a toy poodle and then shrank it to the size of a chipmunk, like the bark that dog would make.
And you would shower with Ignatz.
Next question.
I mean, that's like you clean a bird. This is all to say that when I met you, you were one. I don't give this accolade to a huge amount of people, but you're a really good New Yorker. And I think of the people who truly appreciate New York on all of the different levels. A person who would go to the Fulton Fish Market, a person who would be intimately acquainted with a bar out in Coney Island on the boardwalk, who appreciates all of these things. And the person I knew then, I knew the writing chops, the critical eye that you were developing, seeing you become a person who is the arbiter of fancy a lot of times, who has the people have a notion of being of the New York Times critic as being the person who leads them toward all of these different experiences, but has access in a way that a lot of people won't, because you're making decisions for how people are going to spend their dollars, what is worth spending their money on. And while, of course, you review things all over the spectrum, you were the person who says it is okay or not okay to save up your money and go to this particular place. How did you become comfortable with that?
I don't know. I mean, boy, I don't know if I am totally comfortable with it in just in terms of like how much of my job that should become, because
But it's inescapable.
there are more, right, but like there are more and more like very high-end restaurants opening, where like sort of just to walk in the door it's $200 before you've had a drink, and a few years ago I could count those on one hand, and now I don't think I could even name them all without, having to go and look them up. There's a lot of them. Do I have to review every single one of them? I mean, there's a maybe expectation that the Times should do that because we're the ones who can do that. So we have the
That's
budget,
the thing.
right?
Yes.
We have the budget,
Yeah.
and not
Is
a
it
lot
your
of
duty?
people have the budget, and and we do it thoroughly too. Like I go 3 times. I'm about to write this weekend. I'm about to write a review of a tasting menu place that's about 200. Seems almost like a bargain in a weird way. Yeah, and
Happy 2019,
right.
everyone.
And I went 3 times, like we always do, when they change their menu the first of every month. So I went in January and February, and then just went again for my March visit. So I've had 3 completely different meals at this restaurant that some people might be a once in a lifetime experience, and for a lot of people, of course, they'll never think about going. So there's this sense that because the Times can do that, we've got the resources to set aside to do it, that it's kind of our responsibility to tell people which $250, $300 meals are worth it. And I'm not sure it is really. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's not. That's not, like, if that comes at the exclusion of something else, then it's not, which it does, then it's definitely not. So I have to pick my shots a lot more carefully, I think, than even when I started this job, just because there's a lot of stuff that the average person would look at and say, well, I would never spend that much money on dinner.
I always go back to that Craig Claiborne $4,000 dinner that have they priced that for today?
Gosh, no, it wouldn't be that hard to do. I mean,
is it like a 16?
It would be probably around 20, I think. Yeah.
That it's and that's one of those things where he knew I come back to Craig Claiborne a lot. You know this.
Yeah.
Knowing I have a very particular love of the critics of yore, of Craig Claiborne, of Seymour Britchkey.
We share that. I mean, I think about Claiborne a lot too, because he invented my job. So. But yeah, like that. Well, that's sort of interesting. Like, why did he do that? Well, he knew it would get him on the front page. That's probably all the reason any Times journalist ever needs to do anything, Right. But I think there was also, like, he knew that people would be shocked and appalled, and he didn't think that was necessarily bad because, I think he wanted Americans to think about how much value they placed on food as opposed to other things, and I'm not saying this was a think piece, because it was kind of the farthest thing from it. It was
Yeah.
just, and then we ate, and then we drank, but to have like the New York Times readers like, so, standing outside with like torches and pitchforks over a story about a really expensive meal is maybe a useful exercise to say, like, well, you don't think a $4,000 car is an expensive car. Actually, I don't know what I mean. 4,000 at the time would have been, that would have been
A bit pricey,
a nice car, but maybe not a caddy without.
What year did that happen? It was in the 60s?
64, 66, I don't know.
Yeah, because I remember there was an anniversary recently. The thing also that sticks in my head about him and about you and about me is that I've always had this sense of sneaking in the back door. Craig Claiborne was from, was it Sunflower, Mississippi?
That's right, I think.
Sunflower, Mississippi, and was always acutely aware of the fact that he had to create this persona, that he came from this place that was not fancy and had to create this character. I feel like most...
Yeah, he was not, born with a ticket to the New York Times in his hand.
No, he was so unlikely. He was I believe, closeted guy who'd grown up in, God, I've just had a flash of the disturbing part of his memoir. Don't read that part. I was going to mention this, yeah. But grew up with a very present mother in a boarding house in there and learned to appreciate food in a particular way. But he was incredibly self-taught in a way. And I sort of realized that a lot of my favorite food writers feel like they sneaked in the back door. Josh Zazersky used to talk about this a lot. He wrote actually a very long piece about that, because there was maybe at one point a traditional trajectory. You get an internship at one of the big glossies or at a newspaper, and then this tiny rarefied bunch of people are the people who become the arbiter of taste for the whole country. I've always felt like a weird screw-up kid who stumbled into this by a lot of accident. How do you feel about your journey into this? Like, did you ever question yourself, like, why is it me doing this? What is...
I think, well, I do, of course, I wake up every day and, well, what's going on here?
Where am I?
Right.
Are you my dog?
This is not my beautiful house. Yeah, but, that was the only way to get into it when we got into it. There was no
And
path.
what was it?
There was no it.
That's the thing.
I mean, it's really hard to explain. I want to talk about this because I think there are a lot of people right now talking about,
it.
The food world as if it was built. And it wasn't built. It just sort of it came together because, I mean, in a way, it's like what this town that employs us. It's like a old west boom town that just sort of like shot up really quickly and was like, oh, we need editors, we need writers, we need I mean, one of the reasons I got hired at Food and Wine back in 1999 was because I knew something about cocktails, and they'd never had any cocktail coverage. And now you can't really imagine like Food and Wine being, cocktail illiterate. Like you couldn't do it.
So in '99, when you got this job, I had ever so slightly gotten over being afraid of you. And you got this job at Food and Wine. And I was the furthest thing from a writer at that point. I was this scrappy, weird web designer kid. I was working at Maxim Magazine. Maxim Magazine.
Yeah.
At that point, I'd come from City Search, but I wasn't a writer. I was a designer, and I was too scared to call myself a writer. And then all of a sudden...
And I always thought at some point you were just going to take out your welding mask and go back to metalwork.
Oh yeah, for people who don't know, my master's degree is in metalsmithing. And I didn't know what the hell I was doing, and this sort of world didn't exist, and I didn't think I could do any of this, and I was now fallen into this crowd of this guy I was dating and all of his friends who were all fancy ass writer people, and I was incredibly intimidated by you. And then you got this job at Food and Wine, and it was, to me, the most astonishing thing a person could do. I remember we'd gone out to lunch together for the first time we ever hung out together, I think. I got back to my desk, and my dad loved food and wine, and he sent me a note saying, like, hey, there's this guy, Pete Wells, who looks like a young John Travolta, and I think you'd really like his writing. And I was like, Dad, I just had lunch with him. And he was so, he was so impressed. And the notion that somebody that I knew could work at Food and Wine blew my mind. Were you confident that day that you walked in the door and thought, like, hey, yeah, I have something to say, I have a voice, I have something important, I can do this?
Yeah, I don't know. No, I mean, I don't really know. What I was thinking about more was whether I could edit.
Yeah.
Because I had been a writer, and all I cared about was being a writer, and I didn't want any career except a writer's career, and nobody really was stepping up and saying, here, we will pay you a salary to be a writer. But Food and Wine did offer me a salary to be an editor, and I had to say, I've never done this before, and I don't really know anything about it except for like what I've seen people do when they're editing me.
Yeah.
And Dana Cowan was running the magazine and didn't care. She just thought I would figure it out. And then, turned out at Food and Wine, you got a lot of editorial oversight. So there were, there were layers of editors above me making sure that everything got turned into Food and Wine copy.
So you were not without a net.
Right. No. Yeah. Well, yeah. Mm-hmm. But that was like that made me nervous, and I don't think I was all that intimidated by the institution, but I also I hadn't read it all that much at the time. So
Sorry, Dana.
I knew about it and I'd cooked from it, but I didn't really sit down and read it.
So you did a thing that they were starting to do at the time, and I know this because I would ring into these all the time. You were doing these online chats.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
In the,
right, which is sort of just like what we're doing right now.
Yeah, I think this is now.
You'd have somebody with a laptop, and then questions would pop up from Marge in Minnesota.
Yeah, and you could ask Pete Wells anything, and I would go on there in character sometimes and just ask you questions about what you were doing, and cocktail questions a lot of, because I don't know if people have intuited this by now, but we both like a cocktail. And and it felt like something experimental and fun, and you started writing some things for Food and Wine that didn't feel very Food and Wine, because they were fairly they had more personality in some. They had more first person in them. You went on an adventure with Captain Bacon.
Oh gosh.
And you won a James Beard Award for this, as I recall.
Yeah, that bacon. Yeah, that bacon piece was funny.
Let's talk about that.
Because
It
was just early days of Bacon Mania probably helped light a fire under Bacon Mania.
He stoked the bacon fires.
Yeah.
You were to blame for so much.
Right, and Captain Bacon had invented the Bacon of the Month Club, which was one of the first times that somebody said, there could be a bacon lifestyle if you want it. You could join the bacon lifestyle, and that just blew people's minds, so he sold all this bacon, but he had never met the people who made it. Captain Bacon, his name is Dan Phillips, hadn't met all the smokehouse people, so we went out to Kentucky and Tennessee and really rural parts of the states, because this was where the pigs were. And
you went through Kentucky a certain amount, and you were was it mostly, or was it Tennessee as well, or
Kentucky and Tennessee?
And he insisted that you shower.
Well, that was
part of the rules.
That was part of the rules. But once you get on the road, the rules become flexible.
But I remember it was such a funny thing because I was in awe of all of this. Like, again, I had never in a million years dreamed that I would become a writer or an editor, much less work at Food and Wine. And I remember coming over to your house for a taste test. You were doing a sausage taste test and a bacon taste test.
Well, that was after this trip, I think.
Yes.
Right? I brought back the country bacon and country sausage, which for people who don't know is not like the bacon and sausage that we have in this part of the country, nor that we make. So it's it like the sausage would be typically like ground up pork and salt, and then put it in a bag and hang it in a smokehouse and let it drip and smoke it really heavily. And the ham and the bacon are sort of the same. You just cover them with salt and hang them in a smokehouse and let them drip. And so it's a much drier, more intense, and much smokier style than anything like that I knew in the Northeast, where we put ham and bacon in brine and hold it under, and that's how you get these sort of soggy but wonderful Easter hams. And that's why our bacon, when you touch it, is kind of wet and spits a lot in the pan. And so this was like a new world of pork love,
A whole new world. But you were doing that. You were doing this taste test at your house. I remember there were little bits of paper towel to soak up the grease and stuff.
No, I had you there to soak up the grease.
I was just soaking up the grease, man. And again, in awe. And we were drinking, I think, some rum or some bourbon at the time. But also, who taught you how to taste test? Had you been part of one of those before? Because honestly, that's how I learned to run a taste test at a magazine, was watching you do that. Who taught you how to do that?
Well, I think it was a thing that would happen in like the Food and Wine test kitchen pretty often. They would, sometimes like products would just roll in, and somebody would say, "Oh, here's 5 salsas. Let's stick a chip in it." And then I don't remember doing any wine tastings. Somewhere along the line, though, I'd kind of just gotten the what's the word? I guess there's a routine of blind tasting where, ideally nobody who's doing the tasting knows which bacon is number 6,
Mm-hmm.
So that's what blind means. And then also blind is like you don't have anything in front of you,
Mm-hmm.
and no one's told you what flavors you're going to be tasting, so you're kind of blind in that sense. You're just going into your own head to come up with descriptions for what you're tasting, and how each thing is different from the last thing. It's pretty standard. I don't know where I read it, but it's a super valuable exercise, and I think more people should do it. Actually, I think all these people who really spend a lot of money on their liquor cabinets, for instance, like taste 5, 6, 10 is not too many bourbons
the vertical,
side by side. It's really interesting to taste vodkas side by side, gins side by side is really interesting. You learn a lot.
Well, we have a privilege to work at publications where they will buy all of these things, but it's a fun thing where if you don't come from this world, you don't sort of see behind the veil and see how all of these things are necessarily done. So it had been a really eye-opening thing for me to see how this is done.
That there is a method.
Yeah, that there's and now it's just it's commonplace. That's what we do. And I think some of the people coming into it now just they just take it as part for the course because they maybe have seen a lot of videos about it. There's a lot of video out there now of people testing things.
Uh-huh.
But there are a lot of things that we sort of had to learn. I mean, this stuff had been in place for the magazines for that had been around for 1,000 years, for the newspapers and stuff did it, but it was just sort of a look behind the veil for me, starting out, in this thing.
Some of it we get from some of it we get from like the world of distillers,
Mm-hmm.
who would sit in a room and taste through a line, and some of it we get from consumer advocates and things like Consumer Reports, which really emphasize this rigorous methodology and the blind or sometimes the double blind tasting and that was all kind of maybe new to the food world, to food journalism. I mean, not when I was doing it, it wasn't new anymore, but it was at some point it was new. Where
I'd like to think the person who sort of came up with like the methodology, I'm sure, is probably like one of those women's magazines that have been around for a long time, a Family Circle, a Better Homes, something like that. I'd be curious to figure that out.
I'm curious too now that we're talking about it. I mean, it's part of the lineage of food writing that we don't, I think, give enough respect to. But that's where Mimi Sheraton came from. She came out of a really strong, consumerist point of view, and making sure the consumer really got the best value for their money, and took a kind of hard-nosed, skeptical approach to everything she did, including restaurants, and had, really wanted to, felt that the consumer needed to be protected from restaurant fraud, which would at the time just meant, bad steak or something, like not true fraud. I mean, there is true fraud, but that was, the idea was some of these restaurants are worth your money and some of them are not, and you work hard for your money, and we, the New York Times, are going to try to help you make smarter choices.
Yeah, let's talk through that lineage. So it was Craig first. Was it Mimi after him?
Craig was the first to kind of codify the restaurant reviews. There were restaurants were written about before Claiborne.
Yeah, Clementine Paddleford was out there in her little plane.
Not for us, but yeah, for whoever she wrote for. What was the syndicate she wrote for?
Oh, it was a different New York one.
And then, but we had, I think the food editor before Craig was Jane Nickerson, and she did a lot of the all-purpose coverage, cooking and restaurants, and what was going on in the world of food trends, and I believe she wrote what you'd kind of consider halfway between a restaurant report and a review. But I mean, that's what I do. That's what I do too. It's the same thing. You just go in and you tell people what it's like, and maybe there's a little bit more opinion once you start calling it a restaurant review. But they can always. I mean, there was always a way to sneak opinion in. So, but Craig was the one who kind of, codified it, made it weekly, which was really crucial, and then put stars on it, which was like the thing that made it kind of icon. That's not what it was, but made it the stars. Some made the New York Times reviews like a cultural, establishment, institution.
And it was funny. I mean, if people really look back in it, and they're questioning decisions you made about why'd you review this place, whatever, you have to look back and see he reviewed chock full of nuts.
Yeah, chock full of nuts. So they have that really good date bread, and with cream cheese on it, and he gave that a star, and then the same week I think gave Lutece, which was one of the great French restaurants of its era.
My great
1-star
regret that I make a point of trying to go to some of these institutions before, while I still can, because I have the tremendous regret of not having gone to Lutece. I spent a week a few years ago going to some of these places that I was nervous were going to go away. I went to La Grenouille, which I loved. I went to 21, which I did not love so as much. And
I love being at 21.
I do too.
I love being at 21.
I saw Chelsea Clinton there when I was there, and I went to Russian Tea Room that same week in Sardi's, and just because I think it's really important to honor some of these places that have been around for a long time. I think of you as the kind of current steward of this position, because it is a thing with a long legacy. And because it is a thing with a long legacy that has had various people in the role, it turns it in some ways more into an institution or a character than the actual human involved. I think to a lot of people, you're not a real person.
Nobody who works at the New York Times is a real person to the rest of the world.
Can we talk about that for a second? What it means to be the idea of
I mean,
Pete
there's a lot
Wells.
to say about that. There's a lot to say about that.
A lot of people have written
like,
a lot of words.
You know, I had this like flash of insight. Honestly, like, you know, I think most of the times when people write, and then I suddenly realized that it's ridiculous. Nobody
The Carrie Bradshaw voice.
Right, nobody suddenly realizes anything. You either like you've always thought it, and then you start thinking more about it, or somebody tells you, but you never suddenly realize anything. But in this case, I suddenly realized that the word that describes the relationship of a lot of our readers to the New York Times is projection. And so the Times is like, if you know anything about like Freud's theories of transference, like the New York Times is the perfect object of transference. You know, it just represents authority and everything that people hate in their lives, and all of the arbitrary rules and all of the hidden power, and the people in high rooms in the, you know, alleys of Manhattan making decisions that affect millions. All of that stuff is the New York Times, and it makes people go insane. I mean,
Yeah.
we've seen, like, there's a lot of craziness in our culture around, you know, the New York Times, and
The failing New York Times.
right. There's yeah, and but also, you know, like you see it even in readers who don't know they're crazy, you know, who don't know that they have a somewhat, you know,
People have feelings about you.
People don't understand that their relationship with the New York Times is clouded by these feelings of transference and projection. So I get letters that are really angry, indignant, and disrespectful. They don't start "Dear Mr." anything. They just launch into
Hey,
"You
asshole!"
moron." Yeah. And I know this because when I write back to them, I usually do, unless some are just too rude and, you know, bother. But
Yeah.
I usually write back, and then they're like shocked.
That you're a human being?
They're shocked that a human read it, took the time to respond, and which must mean that a human wrote the thing that made them so angry in the first place, which must mean that maybe there's some fallibility involved, that people do, after all, make mistakes, or people actually have opinions that are other than the ones we hold, and all, you know. And it's not just a case of the New York Times trying to make you have a bad day, right? Or,
is that
you know,
not what you're trying
no,
to
it's
do?
not,
You're
you
not
know,
trying to ruin everybody's lives, the chefs, the restaurateurs,
no, it's
the
so
readers.
There's you know, there
You are a destroyer of Pete Wells, destroyer of worlds.
destroyer of worlds. One of the food discussion boards in the back when these were kind of vibrant and well attended places. One of those food discussion boards had this. Just one of their articles of faith was the New York Times does not like French restaurants. So whoever was the critic obviously was handed a sheet, and on it was like, we don't like French restaurants, and we were all supposed to follow that. So it was like, it was nuts. It was like the Sulzberger family like got together and said, "Oh, make sure you tell the critic we don't like French restaurants."
Like it's like this. They're turning to like freedom fries.
Yeah. But, you know, that's like, there's an idea that the institution kind of functions in this like, you know, 3 days of the Condor level, where they're like, you know, conspiracies inside conspiracies, and people pulling strings that you don't even know are being pulled. It's not like that at all. It's just a bunch of people trying to do their job. Like, it really, really, really is, including all the things that drive readers insane, the political coverage and what they see as bias. It's just somebody trying to do their job as best they can. And I'm not even being paid to say that. It's the
You're
truth.
not going to have like the ombudsman come down on your neck for saying that. It's been such a weird thing as somebody who's known you for a long time and knows you as a human being, to see you being turned into an idea of something, to a character, to the point where there was one year that there were two different very long profiles of you, one in which, for the New Yorker, in which I spoke with the writer at length for this, and and it was funny, I only had a couple little things in there, and still we spent a fairly long time. And then one where it was about that won a James Beard Award in Thrillist for about the idea of who this person thought you were. That's a burden to bear individually. Imagine if some people have the notion of you as this creature. And I know I text you every time I am watching a sitcom. I watch a lot of sitcoms, and they have this thing like, oh no, the New York Times critic is coming in, or your name was actually shouted out on Younger, I believe. I
heard about that.
Yeah. How does that feel when all of a sudden, it might have something to do with the fact that you're anonymous, but that the notion that you're this idea in people's heads, this character, this something, separate from the New York Times, you in particular, and there's a fascination around you.
Well, I don't actually think it's about me in particular at all. And I think the day that
I'd argue it
the
is.
day that I hang up my hat or the hat is wrested out
hang
of
up
my
the
cold
dear
dead hands.
stalker.
On the day that I have to hand this job off to the next critic. I just will return to civilian life, and it won't even be like an ex-president. I won't have Secret
The
Service following me around at all. It'll just be me, and everybody will obsess about the next person. It's like being, gosh, I don't even know you. It's like I don't know what to compare it to, because you're. It's a little bit like political power, where like the president, gets secret service, and the ex-presidents are a small club, but the let's take the ex, Speaker of the House. Like, who cares?
Let us not speak of Dennis Hastert.
Right? No, let's not. Once you lost the power, nobody cares.
You know what? I argue differently here,
Well,
because they all
I'm
sell
gonna try to have a
freaking
life.
memoirs.
I'm going to try to.
Good ones, I will say.
Yeah, I'm going to try to be, relevant in some way. I don't know.
I know. Well, so you mentioned you invoked the president here. I like to think you have as much or more power than the current one.
Oh no! Yeah.
There's a tradition of them exchanging these notes, leaving a note in the drawer. And there's actually a bit I can't separate from fact or fiction, or like whether it happened in The West Wing or it happened in real life. The flak jacket that the press secretary has, where they leave notes in the pocket of that. Is
it TV or is it real?
Really hard to tell
these
days. But is there any sort of passing down of institutional knowledge, at least within the Times, that happens?
Well, sure. I mean, when I started, I went and talked to all my living predecessors.
So Craig is no longer with us.
He's no longer with us. Brian Miller still actually didn't talk to Brian. Brian is still
Sam
around.
Frank.
Yeah.
Is that all that has been? And
well, there are some who had very short stays in the 70s. There's
it was the 70s.
John Hass, who wrote that great book about the American. I can't remember what it was called. Really great book about sort of the state of American food in the 70s, which they thought was really bad. So he was our critic for a while, but he died more than a few years ago. There might have been somebody else.
Was Johnny Apple still around when you took the job, or when did he?
He died right before I started at the Times. Or maybe right after I started at the Times.
So they shared some knowledge, some insight, and then Recently, you were kind enough to, Soleil Ho was starting her new position, and I put you two in touch because I knew, this was a new and big thing. And you were, and I sort of made some joke about the secret cabal of all the critics getting together and deciding things. How much interaction is there between the critics? I don't know how useful that is city to city, but... Because there are,
I try to stay in touch
secret
with
text groups.
I try to stay in touch with there are a few around the country I stay in touch with just because I like them, but there's not really a cabal, except in the sense that when somebody in one part of the country has managed to get their editor to sign off on a story about like what's new in San Francisco. Well, they're going to call the San Francisco critics, right? So there's a little bit of an echo chamber in the way that national coverage gets done. But it's the farthest thing from a cabal.
Which, and I say that because people.
I mean,
people
maybe
think
the
there's a
Beard,
grand.
maybe the Beard Restaurant Committee is the closest thing to an actual cabal in the food world.
Because it's sort of this floating body around the country. Who knows where the Brigadoon is going to land, because they do travel around. But there is a passing on of knowledge that happens too. I've seen you be very generous with talking to some of the newer people in the field, and because I know that there's got to be some exhaustion and burnout that happens with this. I look at your job.
Are you trying to tell me that it's time for me to take someone aside and give them the keys?
No, not even. I want you to do this to your grave, but the thing is, I want your grave to be very, very, very far away. I'm going to read a passage here, if you will bear with me for 1 second. I'm going to be reading this off my phone. I have texted this to various people. You and I have talked about this before. Let me pull it up. It's a Craig Claiborne quote. From A Feast Made for Laughter. And he said, "And to tell the truth, I was bored with restaurant criticism. At times I didn't give a damn if all the restaurants in Manhattan were shoved into the East River and perished. Had they all served nightingales' tongues on toast and heavenly manna and bread, there is only so much that the tongue can savor, so much that the human body and spirit can accept, and then it resists. Toward the end of my days as restaurant critic, I found myself increasingly indulging in drink, the better to endure another evening of dining out. I had become a desperate man with a frustrating job to perform." And that's Craig Claiborne in 1982. So, that's not...
I know it's not a pretty picture. I've never talked to a restaurant critic who reached that stage of burnout.
There was somebody who quit recently, and I sent him that. I don't remember who that was. Somebody in Washington or something who decided to step aside and he wrote a piece about it because he was so tired.
It's tiring. There's running around town. I think if you're doing it right, you run around town a lot. I think I could always be doing more traveling and getting out to more neighborhoods.
We always be doing more.
I don't even think about traveling around the country, but just traveling around New York. When was the last time I was in Astoria? It's been a while. There's always more to do. But for me, the thing that keeps me from getting bored with the job in the general way is just that there's so much variety here. Maybe if it weren't New York, maybe if it were 1968 or 69 when he was writing, and there were maybe, I don't know, let's guess how many different cuisines did Claiborne have to choose from? Maybe 20, maybe 20 cuisines, and now there's like over 100, and I can't even, I can't even count them all. I'm surprised by them all the time. I just did or next week I'll be doing my first Albanian restaurant, which is very exciting.
Oh, that's exciting!
Yeah, I know. So I don't know who could get bored. If you're getting bored, I think it's just a sign that you're not trying hard enough. Yeah. I can understand getting exhausted because I can understand sort of a physical fatigue because it does place a strain on your body, and you have to be real about it.
Are there some nights that you just don't? We think like, God damn it, I have to go and do this again.
Yeah, that usually has more to do with it's usually more to do with all of the social requirements of being out in public, which include, wearing pants.
Screw it. He's not wearing, just so you all know, he's not wearing pants right now. I have seen him wear a caftan at my house. I will put that out there. But yeah,
everyone looks good in a caftan.
Everybody does. And it's really, after you've had a big meal, it is.
Oh, it's very forgiving.
And I actually do remember a night when you put on my faux fur coat and walked around a restaurant and nobody batted an eye, because that is part of the great joy of the anonymity of
that coat was, I thought it really suited me.
It looked really good on you. But there, with all of this, you have seen this evolution of New York dining. You tweeted something yesterday that this is the first time that you have been writing that there was not a Mario Batali restaurant.
I know that just feels like an epoch, or epoch. Maybe I should stick with words I know. It's the end of an era. But it is. Somehow that didn't seem dramatic enough. But it's definitely the end of an era. In a really dramatic way.
Well, and you've had to. This is also, speaking of the crock wearer in the room, this has changed how you have had to cover certain aspects of restaurants. Has changed in the time that you have been. What year did you start as the critic?
2012.
Okay. You have, in that time, and especially in the last year and a half or maybe longer, taken into account the politics of what has happened in the restaurant world around it, and when you're doing a restaurant where there has been somebody controversial at the helm, or in that, it has changed some of the things you have had to look at. Can you talk about that? Having to, I think restaurants, they were always about the culture. Some were more about the food and the decor and the experience, but this is a lot more sort of political context that has to go into this. Would you find that's true?
I'm not even sure political is the right way to put it. I mean, if
moral?
you're talking about, maybe
ethical?
Moral, ethical, maybe, because what's political about not wanting to, work, not wanting to spend your money in a business that treats its employees badly?
No, true. You're right.
I don't think that's a left or right thing. But there's a lot of stuff that's out there on the surface now, and it's not because we care about, sexual harassment or assault in the workplace all of a sudden overnight. We've cared for a long time, but people are willing to talk about it, and that's been the transformative change. That people have been willing to talk, mostly to reporters, about what they say Mario had done to them, or what they say that John Besh had done to them. And then, boy, when it's out in the open, how do you go to that restaurant and not wrestle with it?
Yeah.
How do you
and do you go to the restaurant in the first place?
Or do you go to the restaurant in the first place? Which I also had to think through. So, and I thought that through before I went and did the Four Seasons, where one of the owners, and not just an owner, but basically
the legendary,
the public face of that restaurant, Julian Nicolini, who was the one you called if you wanted a quote. He was the one who was in every story about what was going on at the Four Seasons. He was very gregarious sort in his better moods, and was usually on the floor of the restaurant, and very often the person who greeted you when you came in at
if
the
you're
podium
special
and
enough,
took you to your table. But he was there and looked you over, and had to plead guilty to an assault charge that was brought by a woman who said that he just attacked her when she was standing at the bar. And do I go into that? So that restaurant had a very expensive move and makeover, rebuilt itself in a new address, unrelated to the assault charges. This was a real estate deal. They had to move. But they show up at the new address, and seemingly everything is the same, and Julia Nicolini is still, in all of the, press and PR materials, and what he's not doing is circulating on the floor. I found out when I went, he was staying off in the wings, but nobody had said he's not going to be on the floor eventually. Nobody had said, we appreciate Julian's services, but he'll be kind of overseeing this from a remote location, right? So there was always the sense that he could come back at any moment, and then what kind of meal would that be? I never found out, because as I said, I never saw him when I went to the restaurants, but you have to think it was a possibility. And how good are you going to feel eating your $60 pasta with truffles if there's this guy who's done nasty stuff to a customer of the restaurant? The more I thought about it, the more I thought, God, this just has to be dragged out in public. There's no point in not reviewing the restaurant. The better, at least the more useful thing to do is to try to work this out in the context of a review.
Yeah.
Work it out and think through it, which is what critics are supposed to do, and try to come to some conclusion. Of course, you can't reconcile the things. This appetizer was delicious. The host is a convicted, criminal. You can't make those things come together, but you can hold them in opposition and try to draw some conclusions out of that.
That's my Morrissey problem.
You're right. I mean, they're right. I think it's easier in a way. In a way, it's easier.
It's the giving money.
It's easier with art, especially art that was made at some point in the past. It's
no, I
easier.
didn't buy tickets to his residency.
Right.
That went on. They're going on sale today, and I am abstaining from that.
Right. But I watch movies made by some really nasty men.
Yeah.
And it's to me, it's not as much of a quandary as what do I do with my money tonight?
Yeah, there's a lot of legwork that goes on ahead of time with this, because, and I find myself doing this a lot, where, I think about, I'm gonna work with, I'm gonna work on something about this place, cover this thing, and I do the legwork first to see, okay, they say that they have done these things. There are a lot of these things that are cosmetic, where I noticed that I had been getting press releases from the Four Seasons. Here are women. And and
there's a lot of window dressing and a lot of statements that don't say anything, and a lot of promises of reform that sort of sound okay and don't mean anything.
There's a lot of work behind the scenes about sussing that out, and we're recording this today on International Women's Day. I can't tell you how many press releases I got about all the females in this particular restaurant industry and whatnot, and I was just like, I will do none of it. My International Women's Day move today was to get some dude not to lean back on the pole and mash my knuckles. It's the little victories.
What pole?
Oh, at the subway.
Oh,
not
okay.
the other pole.
Oh, yeah.
The private life. But there's a lot of work that goes into these things. So let's actually talk through what your week looks like, moving up to a review, because you have to make all of these decisions about what you're going to cover, what you're not going to cover, how you scope the places you're going to, how you go to the places. So let's go through a week in the life of Pete Wells.
Oh God, do we have to?
Yes.
It's going to be so miserable for anybody who's still listening that there's so much drudgery. I can't even tell you. There's so much of just so much of it is scheduling and staring at the calendar and trying to figure out, which restaurant I need to go to on which day with which people and who's going to be available, and is it going to add up to me having a restaurant to review a month from now? it's really
This is important. Actually, this is the important stuff to talk about
I
because
think it
people
may actually be three-dimensional chess. You know how everyone says, "Oh, it's not three-dimensional chess." I think this might be.
Yes, and that's the thing that people. A friend wrote a piece recently that had a big, actually, Portia Wilson, we'll say it. Portia Wilson wrote this, this piece, and she was then afterwards, dealing with everybody's reaction to it. And I said, they see that you ran this marathon, they didn't see all the training for it, so they don't know how much intellectual, emotional, all the labor that went into something. People only see the end product of what this is. So I think this is valuable for people to listen to, who see that there is this review that is however many 100 words. How many hours would you say goes into a review?
Oh boy, I don't know. I mean,
that per se review. How many hours went into that per se review?
Well, a lot. I mean, we have the Times has had a rule that any starred review has to be written off of at least 3 visits, and we've had that rule since Claiborne. I think he came up with it, and I think it's like one of the most famous things about my job, and yet there are probably a lot of people who don't know that, who think, I go, because sometimes I write it and you could think I just went once. Sometimes I'm explicit about the second time I thought this and the third time I thought that. But
I've seen you torture yourself debating.
How much am I going to lead people through my process? How much am I going to recreate the history? I saw your
Heart of Darkness journey through the per se review.
A little bit,
and actually, you texting me. This was some in the New Yorker article, but you texted me about going to Senor Frogs, and I was like, is this a cry for help?
Don't pretend that you didn't also go to Senor Frogs.
Oh, no, I will not. But at first I was seriously trying to figure out, is Pete okay? Because he's talking about going to Senor Frogs. But then
I was never more okay in my life.
And the thing is, here's the thing. I ended up on Twitter talking to people about this in Twitter. I know you have feelings about Twitter, but I was talking with people about it who thought that you were going for an easy dunk or something. And I wrote back, I was like, I can legitimately say that I have never seen this longtime friend of mine. I don't think I've ever seen you happier or freer or more giddy than the night we went to Senor Frogs and danced in a conga line with balloon hats on our heads, with Jason Biggs right there along with us.
Yeah, that was just a magical night in a not very good restaurant, something just but it was. I mean, I was thinking about this the other day. Why did I do that? It was kind of fun to read, I hope, but it was also here's this restaurant that by most standards is kind of terrible. I mean, they forgot to bring me my food one night, and the server was like, "Oh yeah, where is your food? This is so weird." And so by most normal standards, shouldn't even be considered a restaurant, maybe, if they don't bring you food, but it was more fun than a lot of places I was reviewing week to week, and I just thought, what have they got that these other places are missing? What do they understand?
Well, the thing is, I know that so many people thought, oh, you were, it was, I think people, had such a great fun time with the review, but people thought you were being classist or whatever, and I had to say to them, no, this is not irony, this was actual fun, and you and I developed a system of breaking down the population from that visit there, because we were sort of thinking about, would this person join the conga line?
Yeah, right. I mean, that's the ultimate test. Would you wear the balloon hat and get on the conga line, or are you too good for the balloon hat?
Yes, and for the shot of whatever that horrifying cocktail into your mouth from a stranger, and the thing, I still break down people by this. Would they get in the conga line? I think this is actually how we need to pick our next president. Donald Trump would not get in the conga line.
Would he?
No,
I don't know.
No, I don't think he would. Mike Pence would not get in the conga line.
Well, yeah. Yeah, probably.
Hillary would join the conga line. It would be
loves
awkward.
conga.
Yeah. I think Beto would get in the conga line.
Of course, yeah. I think he used to be in a conga band, right?
Yeah, I think Alex AOC, would, she's a great bartender, in fact.
That's right.
And she could be pouring in the shot.
The mystery cocktail.
Yeah.
She could be. I mean, I think that reaction you're talking about is more of the that kind of projection and
You make people
transference thing.
absolutely.
It's like, well, it's the New York Times. They must, being this august institution, they must be looking down their noses at this.
Joe America.
Yeah, right. Which I got a ton of with the Barrio. I mean, excuse me, the Guy Fieri review. I got a ton of that.
Mm-hmm.
This is the real America, and the New York Times, and the elitist East Coast, blah blah blah. Shoot me now, like.
Right.
But that really came. It was and in full force. And it was a little preview of what the Make America Great Again was going to treat us all to.
You think you're better
in a
than
few
us?
years. Yeah.
Wells?
Yeah. But absolutely the New York Times is what people imagine the New York Times to be plays a huge role in that.
The thing also that I saw in you writing the Senior Frogs review versus the per se one, because you put blood, sweat, and tears into per se. I know that was
Also
not
into Senior Frogs.
Oh no, true, but there was joy that went into this, and there was existential angst that went into this, and I think I was genuinely worried about you during that time because I love you, and it was also, I think, in a December or January when neither one of us is in an especially great mood.
I needed the prescription that Senor Frog had.
you've got the fever that only froggy birthday. No. I wish everybody could. There is a video I put up on YouTube of what happened that night. Pete is not in it, but Mr. Jason Biggs, excellent sport, was in there. We lied and said it was his birthday, and things happened. But I saw you take joy in it, and you and I have talked about this a fair amount, and I think this is actually going to be really useful for writers listening to this. It's hard to write, yes.
Yeah, it's always better to be done.
But starting, I mean, I think people look at you who is one of the true, and I thought this about you before you had the job and stuff, like you've always been a writer who I admired the end product tremendously, and I sort of loved it even more once I realized that you struggle too. It's hard for me to write. It's really difficult to make myself sit down and do it. Vyvanse has helped recently. I got diagnosed with ADHD, which actually that's helped a lot. But sitting down and do it is a really hard, difficult thing. I procrastinate, and I get the sense that you may as well.
Yeah, I read something really helpful about that, and it was actually, I think it was in my paper, and it had to do with, like, stay off the internet when you're trying to get work done. And there was some expert, I have no idea what this person's expertise was, but some expert was quoted saying, like, the reason you go on the internet is that whatever you're procrastinating because it's work. Which seems so obvious, but yeah. Just to be told that, like, you're procrastinating something because it's going to be hard, and your brain would rather do the easy thing of looking at Corgi videos.
They're good. Corgi videos.
Do you have any?
I
could
pull
we see
one
some
up.
Corgi videos now?
I can show you a Penelope video.
Oh, could we?
Penelope is my dog. It's a long, low dog, and I think she and Pete are soulmates.
What did you call her? Long?
Oh, long and low.
Oh, long and low. Yeah. She has that.
She got a low rider.
Root beer barrel body.
Yeah. She does, but I think it's really valuable for people to know that even somebody who operates in your position and at your level has a hard time doing it.
There's work that has to be done inside your head, but I mean, some people can do it on paper, actually, and I admire that, but I don't have that skill. There's work that has to be done inside my head that has to do with, like, all the basic stuff that's going to become the foundation of the writing, which is, like, where are we going to start? Where are we going to start shining the spotlight? Where's the spotlight going to move to? how much weight are we gonna put on this versus that, and what tone of voice are we gonna use? Are we gonna sound?
Are you gonna do questions?
Right,
Are you gonna
right.
be all like, oh, this is a positive?
Right, right, and if you've got good news and bad news, which one do you start with, and how much of it do you give before you pivot over to the bad news, and then do you try to reconcile them, or do you just leave it and say, yeah, there's good news and there's bad news, and that's life? There's a lot to be done, and the first few paragraphs are kind of where you make all of the decisions about how you're going to do it, and they're real decisions, and they have consequences, and that's work. And if you don't, if you don't do it now, you're gonna have to do it later. And I'm trying to just orient myself toward it a little more, I don't know what's the word, honestly, and say like, okay, there's this work that needs to be done, and if I go look at the Corgis, I will have seen Corgis, which is a positive thing, but I also have avoided the work, and I'm going to have to do it again 3 hours later when I'm tired of looking at Corgis.
Pete,
36 hours later.
Every restaurant you go into is going to have Corgis on the placemat now.
But not on the menu.
It's good. No, God, no. Oh, God, no. I'm getting the wrap-up sign, but I have a couple things I want to ask you before the speed round. One is, what do you wish chefs understood about what you're doing?
Corgis have to be roasted very slowly at a low temperature. Just that it's not personal. I mean, that's the main thing. And the ones who've been in the business a long time get that, but they still have a hard time. There are things that intellectually that you have a hard time metabolizing, and I think that's one of them. That, just as when we civilians are criticized by someone we love, or someone who has some authority over us, like a boss, or just by any random idiot, our first reaction is never to say, oh, what if this person is right? That's maybe our second or third or fourth reaction, but our first reaction is, I'm going to kill you now, right? or I'm going to go hide under the bed for the next 3 days or something. But it's never like, oh, that person just delivered me some interesting feedback about how I'm doing in the world. I'll bet there's something in it that I should ponder. No, and that's that's not what any chef is going to think getting a negative review. The first reaction is going to be personal.
They don't get it.
It's going to be personal,
no, and I understand that, because loving a lot of chefs and stuff, but
it's never. It's just never personal, and I am always
people
doing a job, But the people I think know that, but it's a long way from knowing it to feeling it.
I thoroughly understand that. And now there's a question that I ask of every guest, because I believe in the Oprah-ness of this, of using the secret and saying things out into the world so they can become true. Pete Wells, what do you want?
You ask everybody this?
Yeah.
Do they all freeze? Because I'm just going to freeze. I'm not going to.
Yeah. No, I started doing it a few ago, and no, it takes a second to say something.
I have no idea. I mean, I'm stumped.
Yeah. It's.
Well, you're just going to sit there until I come up with it.
Yeah, because I text you this sometimes.
Aren't you going to run out of tape? Isn't this on a reel-to-reel, and the tape's going to...
I know. Because I text you this question sometimes. What do you want? What would make you happy?
Oh, come on. What does happiness have to do with any of it? I mean, it's not. It's certainly not the business of the readers and the listeners at home, although I hope they all find their own happiness.
Nope, reaching into the bag.
Oh, this is what I want. Of course, coffee syrup. Or is it? Yes.
It's mildly expired.
You knew, and I didn't know mildly expired doesn't matter. Used by Oh, that's nothing.
There's
That's
and
that was just like 2 months ago. That's not even expired. That doesn't even count as expired.
and
This is so great.
there's a reason I gave him this. So would you
Well,
explain
does
what
anyone know what we're
could you
holding in our hand?
explain this what I
This
just
is
gave to you?
a plastic bottle of Eclipse naturally flavored coffee syrup, made by the Finley Extracts and Ingredients Company at 10 Blackstone Valley Place in Lincoln, Rhode Island. I grew up in the town next to Lincoln, and drank a lot of coffee milk in my childhood because when you went to school, there the lunch ladies would sell you regular milk or coffee milk or chocolate milk, and so of course you would get the coffee milk, right? Because anybody, I mean,
It's the official state drink.
Yeah, right. So we were all, weaned on caffeine at an early age, and yeah, I do have a love for the coffee flavor that maybe is a little bit, Rhode Island specific. Like I love coffee ice cream and coffee syrup, and
It's all gonna be corgi and coffee. at every
Corgis and
restaurant.
coffee.
And there's a reason
Hi,
for
welcome
that.
to Corgis and coffee.
And there's a reason for the necklace as well, if you would say it in the voice.
Hot wieners? You got hot wieners?
Hot wieners up the It's also a Rhode Island. This is not a proper New York system wiener from Rhode Island, but
No, it's not. But I
'Cause
get
it doesn't have chili
I get
on
the
it.
idea. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So it's a wiener from Onlyville,
Yeah. Onlyville system wiener.
New York system.
Yeah. So guys, or guys and gals. Oh my God, I just used gendered language. If you want to make Mr. Wells happy, you'll do corgis and coffee milk and a hot wiener up the arm. So we've got 5 questions that I ask every guest. Also, speed round.
Okay, I'll try not to blank out, but don't ask me about my emotional state. That's below the belt.
You'd be amazed at the answers we get. What is your comfort food?
Oh, I'm actually not sure I have one. I mean, I have things that I eat that make me happy that I wouldn't really serve anyone. So like I can get really into a bowl of oatmeal when the weather's right, and I think oatmeal is a little bit unpresentable,
Have you seen Instagram? It's all oatmeal.
Not the way I make it. I don't know. Like they put, yeah. I mean, you have to do a lot of work to make oatmeal look fancy, because it's not fancy.
And again, coffee milk, oatmeal, corgis.
Yeah, I'm sort of amazed actually by that Instagram has enabled the rise of grain bowls, because to me the grain bowl is like
Feels
the
like
least
work.
appealing thing. But then I guess that it's this beige canvas that you can put other colorful stuff on.
Yeah.
But not me. I don't have blackberries to put on my oatmeal.
Oh,
I
the
might
life of
have
the New York Times food critic.
My favorite oatmeal lately, not that you asked, but my favorite oatmeal lately is some dates. Slice up some dates and a spoonful of orange marmalade, and it is delicious with buttermilk if you have buttermilk, and but it's not pretty.
That actually sounds kind of lovely.
You should try it.
Yeah, when I can eat grains again, I will. So what is the last meal that you had that made you emotional?
Well, that's a really good question. It's probably been a while, and I'm not. I mean, well, I guess there are all kinds of emotions.
Mm-hmm. Could be rage.
Can feel sort of like happiness is a good one. Is a good one actually.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I'm not big on comfort food. It's sort of one of my pet peeves. Drives me a little bit bananas. But I did feel very comforted by a lot of the Albanian food, because it was a lot of like just delicious kind of like yogurty sauces with fluffy cornbread and this cornmeal thing, and there was just a lot of things that were like simple and delicious, but not of my culture,
Yeah.
of somebody else's culture. So it wasn't that, you know, there's always that idea in comfort food that you retreat to your own childhood, and that's part of what drives me crazy about it.
Oh, my childhood meals sucked.
Yeah. But it was somebody else's comfort food maybe, and I also thought this place just sort of had this lovely spirit of, enjoying being at the table.
I can't wait to go there.
Yeah.
So what's the last meal that somebody cooked you in their home?
Oh, I better get this right, because if I don't, somebody's going to be really mad. And already there's somebody who's sort of tapping a foot in impatience, wondering why I can't remember.
Who knows when this airs, though?
Can I think for a minute?
Yeah.
Can we have dead air while I think about it?
And I could ask you the next question if you want to go back to that.
Sure, although, yeah, go ahead.
Or if you want to think about it for a second.
Holy heck, it wasn't that long ago, but I'm blanking on it. I mean, I did have a really great Super Bowl meal that was all that was home cooked, and that involved hot wieners and coffee syrup, and they were gonna make Johnny cakes, but then the Johnny cakes got delayed.
Was there some Del's?
There was Del's lemonade. Yep, there was all that, and then there was some food from who else was in the Super Bowl besides the Patriots? There was another team.
Wait.
LA.
Our producer says
they're right. So there's a town called Los Angeles, and they supposedly have food out there too. So there was some
I
of
hear
that.
nice things are happening.
Yeah.
Those crazy kids are catching on.
Right. So there was some whatever they eat out there. We had that.
You were moved enough to text me a picture of your Super Bowl bounty, which is pretty.
Yeah. That was just exciting, and it was
really sweet.
It was
thoughtful.
Right, and it was a lot of work went into it, and a lot of thought. I'm not sure that was the last one I had, but
Who
it's
knows
the first
when
one
it's
that
there,
popped to mind.
What living musician would you want to cook for, and what would you feed them?
Oh. Ooh.
You're a big music person.
Oh, gosh.
You are like,
Boy,
this is
that's
something
such
people
a-
should know about Pete.
that's such a
He's a
good
huge
one.
music person.
I mean, gosh, so many of the country
yeah.
stars would have been so great, and then we've just watched them go one by one, and they're not around, but Willie's around.
Willie, you would not be
Willie's
the first person to
around.
answer Willie to that. Now,
Yeah.
what would you cook Willie?
Waylon's not around, right? I think Waylon checked out, so I can't cook for Willie and Waylon. I'm sorry, Waylon, if you're there, I'm very sorry.
Dolly's
just-
around. Right.
Sure. Okay. That's what I would cook for.
What would you cook for
Thank
Dolly?
you. I'll cook for Dolly. What would I cook for Dolly?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I would just try to make her as happy as she's made me. But I don't. I think one of the things the great old time country stars did was they always made you feel like you were important, you the fan. I saw Tammy Wynette one time, and she was performing maybe at town hall, and had the limo drop her out in front of the theater and walk into the theater maybe 45 minutes before the show, hour before the show. So all the fans rushed up with their autograph books, and she stopped and signed every one of them, and I was like, this is amazing. This is like show business, like it should be,
Yeah.
It's just that acknowledgement that she wouldn't be there without the fans was incredible. So anyway, in my delusion, I believe that Dolly would appreciate whatever I happen to cook.
I've had your food, and yeah. Pete's a great cook, by the way. People may not know this, but punch and large hunks of meat are very much in his
I
work.
might not give Dolly a large hunk of meat. I might try to do something a little more a little more delicate.
But I think
She's a small person.
She is, but I think she'd get down with your cocktails. One last question. You've got 5 minutes uninterrupted for self-care. What do you do?
Oh God, I'm so glad you didn't say 5 minutes to live. I hate that question so
No,
much.
I'm not looking to your mortality. You're going to be a restaurant critic at the Times till the Times is gone.
Okay, I have 5 minutes of, what did you call it?
Uninterrupted self-care time. Your phone is not there.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand the concept of self-care. I've heard about it.
Yeah.
It seems to be is that a Gwyneth thing? Is that a thing that Gwyneth does?
I think it might involve
Is it goop related?
a hotel bathroom and some donuts.
Okay, fine. Okay.
Oh!
I'm there.
Would it involve cake vodka?
Oh, only if you were there. Not cake vodka solo is maybe not my idea of happiness, but cake vodka with a friend.
Yeah.
Yeah, very much.
Cheers, Pete Wells.
Thank you, Kat.
Thank you so much to our guest today, Pete Wells, and you can find him on Twitter at Pete_Wells.
You can't find him on Twitter at all because he stays away, but you can see some old things he wrote a long time ago.
Pete Wells is also in the New York Times, and he's also standing right behind you. And you can find links to all of his socials, whether they are populated or not, and to his writing in the episode description. Thank you to our producers, Jennifer Martinick, Alicia Cabral, and Amy Frank. Thank you to Douglas Wagner for our delightful theme song. If you like what you heard, please tell a friend and write a review or rate us. And if there is something you would like us to talk about or a guest you would like to hear more from, please let us know. You can find me on Twitter, where I'm overactive, at Kitten with a Whip. Find out more about the show and catch up on all the episodes at foodandwine.com and Food and Wine's YouTube page. Thank you for listening, and take good care of yourself until the next time.